So, Australia has just hit a wild milestone. Our property market is now worth over $12 trillion. That is trillion with a T. Some new data has just literally come hot off the press. Cold into my inbox is probably more realistic of what it's actually done. At the time of recording this is still embargoed data, but by the time it lands in your beautiful ears, it will not be. And I want to talk about the reality of buying a property in Australia today, be it as someone who is frantically trying to figure out how on earth do I do that as a first home buyer, someone who's already in the property market and perhaps has some equity that they're looking to leverage to perhaps buy more property, someone who might be thinking is now a good time to downsize and get some cash out to do some other stuff. There are so many emotionally charged reactions when we talk about property, and especially when we talk about property at the moment. But given it is an enormous asset for most people, it is a huge challenge for most people, but it's also such a big amount of money from sort of a cultural perspective in terms of how much of our wealth sits inside property. I want to have the honest, frank conversation. I know I've done it before, but things have changed. The winds have shifted. Let's give you an update of what buying property in Australia looks like right now. And also I want to give you some ideas, tips and hope, because yes, the data can be scary and it can feel frustrating. And I wish that I had, the magic silver bullet run from anyone that tells you that they have that when it comes to property in Australia, because they are possibly, probably, definitely lying to you. But I don't want you to think that that means that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is the weirdest saying. There are some things that you can do. I've put my thinking cap on. If you are wanting to buy in Australia right now, let's tell you where we're at. Let's tell you what's changed, and let's tell you what you might be able to do to get in, on, or up the property ladder. This is a podcast for everyone that wants to learn how to make fierce and bold choices with their money. We'll talk about how to shape your money mindset, investing for your future, your spending habits, the good and the bad, plus how to achieve your financial goals, and most of all, how to be financially fierce. I am a financial educator and I want to empower you to be more in control of your money and build the financial future that you want. I run the Greenhouse Money Growing Program, and you can find details of that in the podcast show notes. My name is Jess Brady. It's time to get financially fierce. Okay, so as I said, we have just hit a milestone in that the Australian property market is now worth, I'm going to say over $12 trillion. And you might be like, cool, Jess, love that for everyone who has property or the economy or whoever else might enjoy that. But what does that actually mean for me? Where does that leave me? Let's be really clear. You are not imagining it. And you might want to remind your naysaying, uncle or auntie or that annoying person as the Christmas season descends upon us and they fight back or clap back at a barbecue saying, well, in my day, let's just quash that. Because you can politely tell them that actually we have some of the highest home prices to income multipliers in the world. Even when there was double-digit interest rates, I think I saw some research from the Grattan Institute a while ago, it was not the same as it is today in terms of percentage of household income that is going towards getting into a bucket load of debt. And I mean, no one would have enjoyed double-digit interest rates. Please don't get me wrong. I think that would have been an enormously stressful time. But that was generally a one-income producing household. We are now talking about, on average, 2 people going to work full-time and spending more than half of their household income on debt. And when you have double-digit interest rates, definitely would be scary because you might have not thought that that would have ever occurred. But I think there's also the reality that at some point those went down. And depending on when you got that debt, you would have had an interesting journey over that, 3 decades or however long it took for that person to pay off their debt. But there was hope that it would come down. When you are buying at the eye-wateringly high levels that we're buying at today, it doesn't matter what the interest rate is, you've still got that giant level of debt. So I just want to sort of make sure that you understand that it is not you. The gap between dreaming of the place of, your hopes and aspirations and actually being able to execute or do that, it feels insurmountable for a lot of people. And I think there's some data, as I said, that's just recently come out from Cotality, and there's sort of data within the data, and it tells a bit more of a nuanced story. So yes, prices have gone up again. No one wins any gold stars for guessing that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the property fence you sit on, that was most people's predictions. We're going to go into why that is a bit later on in the episode. But there are things that are potentially happening which might help you if you are a first home buyer. I don't know. I don't want to say play the game. It does feel like a game which is rigged. Someone's cheating. I always liken it to Monopoly, where you've just like joined and everyone's got hotels and you're like, oh God, every roll of the dice is bloody expensive. So to break it all down, what does this $12 trillion property market actually mean? We want to talk about this concept of like the house premium, why it's just hit a new record high, and how you can absolutely be fierce and smart even if you're starting small or you feel like you're starting late. If you know someone that is also feeling all the feels when it comes to buying the first property for them or the next property for them, send this to them, because we're going to have lots of juicy insights that I think will really help them. And even just in solidarity, because I am so sick of property experts on Instagram who tend to be very masculine. Can we say dickheads? Insert whatever word you would like, who basically tell you it's your fault. If you can't get in or ahead or something like that, that's a you problem. And I think that that is absolutely not what this data shows. It shows that you still can get in, but if you think it's easy and that everyone else is just like off eating avo, being idiots, then you have absolutely not read the room. And it is so frustrating to watch as someone who is a numbers expert to know that what they are telling people, A, is so disheartening and, you know, it's so elitist, but actually it's just also wrong. The data is wrong. Anyway, if you are one of those people, hello and thanks for listening. Because aren't we sure that that is the community of people that I am speaking to? Them's my people. If you are listening and you have different data, send it my way, my friend. If you've got data that's different to the national data that is used by all of the majors, and I'm missing something in that data that helps you spew out that it's everyone else's fault, send it over. And I'll retract my statement about being wrong. But until I see that data, I'm going to stick on my train. You are not going mad. It is perfectly valid to feel how you're feeling. What I'm going to show you today, though, is that we need to dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up, have an emergency coffee, tea, wine, hug from a pet or friend or whatever, and we need to take the next step forward, because the market is not going to sit and wait for us to feel less jaded, less frustrated, less despondent. It's running ahead of us, whether we like it or not. All right, let's give you some big picture data, because we all know that I am a numbers lass. All right, this is as of November 2025. What we are seeing is in the last quarter, property prices nationally rose about 2.8%. That's just in the last 3 months. That's a lot of growth. Actually, it's the biggest quarterly jump in more than 2 years. And what we've actually seen is a 6.1% increase over the last year. Yeah. And so now with this $12 trillion housing value in Australia, it is important to note that that is double what the housing market was worth a decade ago. That's a big increase. $6 trillion increase, if I'm not mistaken. Are we shocked and surprised by that? Probably not, because many people will say to you property values double about every decade. So perhaps this was always coming. But I think, again, if we look at all of the underlying factors that have made it really challenging, you know, if we look at inflation and how much that has, you know, impacted people's cash flow, if we look at wage growth and just how stagnant that's been over the last few years, you can have a property price or property value double over 10 years. But if you are not earning enough to be able to then, you know, service what double the value actually means, that is where it gets frustrating. That is where we are for many people, I think, my friends. And I also just want to call out, it's not just Sydney and Melbourne anymore. In fact, Melbourne seems to have gone on a strange little, detour for a little while now. In fact, this data actually shows that the fastest growth areas, allegedly, is Perth, Darwin, and Brisbane. Yeah. I mean, this kind of makes sense, right? Because they have been, on paper, like more affordable places or markets. But now with the level of growth that they're having, they are kind of catching up. And, Sydney and Melbourne, as I said, Melbourne seems to be, hello, Melbourne listeners. I don't know, it's gone off on its own little slow. They've had a retraction for quite a while, which I can't figure out, other than COVID and everyone wanting to go to somewhere warmer, which I think perhaps is the big reasons. But, Sydney has just been like steamrolling ahead and Melbourne had been retracting for a while. Interesting. And I've spoken to a lot of buyer's agents, and this is not property advice because clearly I'm not one of them. But of those who I have heard from over the last, I'm going to say 12 months, they keep saying the same thing to me because, of course, everyone wants to know, like, where do I buy? Where do I buy? Where's the hotspot? Where do I buy? And people are always saying, like, Melbourne's undervalued. Melbourne is undervalued. You might be living in Melbourne going, yeah, right. But then when you look at places like Sydney, comparatively, they are quite different numbers. So in case you thought you missed the boat, my friend, don't worry. We're at the dock. We haven't departed just yet, but you might need to hurry so that you don't, fall in the water, or you might need to get on at a different point. Okay, let's give you some more data. So I mentioned the last quarter, 2.8% increase, largest increase we've had since July 2023. Let's give you the 12 months. I think I mentioned it, but just as a wrap up, 6.1%. If you have been sat scared for 12 months, maybe you've been one of those, doomsday people who I ever so often see on the comments who are like, it's going to crash. I'm waiting for the crash. These poor people have been waiting for the crash for a very long time. Now the same property that you wanted to buy 12 months ago is statistically likely to be about 6.1% more. Now that little number may not sound like a lot, 6.1%. But when you are talking about a 6.1% increase off a very high base, we are talking about a lot of extra cash. Either a lot of extra cash that you've got to cough up as a deposit amount, or a lot of extra cash that you're going to need to be able to borrow to have that place. Now, whether the bank will give that to you is one question, but then servicing it, the ability for you actually to be able to pay for that every month for however many decades you're going to need to pay for it is a whole nother thing entirely. So when we see these little changes, it can look easy to think, oh yeah, that's not that big a deal, but we've got to remember that we're starting from a really high base. Now, I also saw this, which was quite interesting, and I know I've talked about this before, but this is new data. So house prices have a premium over apartments. They call it the house premium. Houses are rising faster than, I always call them apartments, they always call them units. They are definitely rising faster than units. And the house premium across the capital cities has grown to approximately 363,000. So that is just shy of half, 49.9%. Let's call it half. The median capital city unit value. So let me just rewind. The median capital city unit value, so how much these apartments are across the capital cities in Australia, is about 728,000 as of the day I'm recording this. The growth of houses is 363,000. That's nearly half of the value of that apartment, which is why it can be so hard if you do have an apartment and you're like, I did the thing, I got in, I'm paying a shitload into my mortgage every month and strata, I have to sit on the bloody committee. How do I leapfrog to the house? Well, you need to know that the best way to leapfrog to the house is to own a house already, because then you would get a higher level of growth and that would do a lot of the work for you. The problem is, of course, because houses are growing at such a faster rate, that is a huge challenge because you're just watching it race ahead of you. How do you get into a home when you don't have a home already? And I say a home, what I should say is house, presuming that means a freestanding house as opposed to apartments. Apartments don't grow as much as houses. And so we also need to be realistic and just pause there and say, is it feasible? Okay, let me just read this to you so you can understand the crazy train of thought I'm going on. This is from Cotality. With house values rising faster than units over the 3 months to October, 3.1% versus 2.3%. That's the difference in the growth over the last quarter. The house premium across the capitals has grown to approximately $363,000, just shy of half, 49.9% of the median capital city unit values, $728,000. So it's a pretty considerable difference if you are trying to move from an apartment to a freestanding house, especially if you're trying to use it based on the growth or upgrade based on the growth of your apartment. Your apartment is not likely to be able to support that level of jump. You're going to have to fund it probably with debt. Some other data that I just wanted to touch on, because 12 trillion is a big number. It's a big number. Like, just to give you some context, the superannuation pool in Australia is 4.3 trillion, allegedly. The Australian share market is 3.6 trillion. And commercial real estate in Australia is 1.3 trillion. So even if you added all three of those, the superannuation pot, the Australian listed stocks, and commercial real estate, you are still not getting to the total that is the residential real estate market in Australia. It is 55.5% of total national household wealth. Yep. Household wealth held in housing is 55.5%. So I get my greenhouse members to do something called a net wealth position. So we look at what are all of our assets, what are all of our liabilities. We get this cute little pie graph that gives us some insights in terms of where are our assets at the moment. It helps us understand sort of where we have work to do, but also sort of at a high level, what is our overarching position? Because you might have super fund over there and you might have savings here and, stuff can be scattered everywhere. This gives us that one nice picture. And for a lot of people, what they do notice is that a giant proportion of their wealth sits in housing. Often it is their home, which has challenges if you are wanting to build wealth, but you don't intend on downsizing and your cash flow does not support you being able to invest outside of your home because you're too busy paying down the mortgage. It's also, wildly criticized. Widely and wildly, I just merged those words. So whatever just came out then is my new word for that. Because it's quite an unproductive asset. Like if we think about this giant amount of money and we think about how many jobs that creates or, opportunities that creates, yes, sure, there's real estate agents and property managers and maintenance people and all of those people. But it is quite a lazy asset. It's not ultra productive from an economic perspective. So to have such a big portion of our wealth in housing is an interesting data point that I just wanted to share with you. So going back to that sort of housing versus units or apartment divide, the divide is wide. What we now know from this data is across the capital cities, the median house price is now over $1 million, 1.09. As I mentioned before, the median unit price is $728,000. So that's a $363,000 gap, almost 50% more for a house. In Sydney, it is whopping. The gap is so that is a boat that may have been missed and the ship may have sailed because it is a whopping 78% gap. What I think I'm saying to you is a freestanding house in Sydney is now basically unattainable. If you earn even, I would say, a pretty decent income and you don't inherit money or win the lottery or, I don't know, sell a business for a lot of money or have some giant amount of cash. So if you have been sitting on a goal to buy a property that is a home in Sydney, unless any of those things are true or likely to be true, I am going to just gently sit with you and hold your hand spiritually, wherever you are right now, while I say to you, I think that dream needs to be reimagined. Because the house prices in Sydney are just too far gone for most people. Again, there are exceptions. If you have big income, if you bank a mum and dad bankroll you, awesome. Awesome. If you inherit a lot of money, okay, sure. But for the majority of people, if that has been your dream, I know that I am here just shooting them down. But I don't want you to keep waiting for something that doesn't appear to be happening. So if you were looking for, I don't know, a speck of grass, a blade of grass, a hills hoist, I don't know, a backyard. I think we need to be honest about we need to look up and out and to perhaps to somewhere else. Maybe it's that you buy an apartment. Maybe you buy a townhouse. I don't know. Maybe you go somewhere else where it does become more affordable. And that has, I understand, a whole heap of implications. But there are so many people who are holding on to dreams and they haven't been able to let go of them just yet. And they are waiting on the sidelines for something to change that is not likely to. So buying an apartment might be awesome. You might get to stay in the area that you love. You might not have to mow the lawn ever. That sounds wonderful to me. If there's any maintenance issues, hopefully the strata have managed their pool of money well enough so that you don't have to worry about it. You know, I think we've also societally said that living in a home is the must do. And yet in so many parts of the world, actually, for a long time, people have lived so happily and successfully in apartments. I don't think we've architecturally got the best apartments to like grow and support, you know, dynamic family changes. And I agree with that. Hopefully that is something that can change over time. But I don't think being in an apartment means that you've like quote unquote not made it. And yet I do think that that is the inference. Whether people like to admit it or not is one thing. And it's like, oh, well, they bought a home. Oh, wow. And it is wow. Like it totally is wow. We're allowed, two things can be true at the same time. We're allowed to go, oh, wow, oh, shit, that's amazing. And we're also allowed to go, this, what I have is also enough. And like, I'm actually happy here and I'm okay with that. And it's different to what I might have expected or hoped or dreamed of. But I can walk to the coffee shop. I'm in the location that I want. I'm close to all amenities. This is grand. We're always often looking at what other people are doing, and not everyone, but most people are subliminally kind of weighing up themselves as like a success marker. Well, like, am I successful enough? Why am I not successful enough? And I think we need to understand that we're in this really interesting tension and transition point, and like, it is okay to not ever own a home. Is it okay? And if the answer is a hell no, then either you're going to need to earn a lot of money or you're probably going to need to move somewhere else. Personally, I don't see myself living in an apartment, hopefully not for a long time. And that is because I am quite a claustrophobic person. And I grew up not on a big property, but on a property. And I'll never forget when I moved to Sydney and I was on my balcony one day, I think I was like 20 or 21. And I heard someone who I couldn't see sneeze. Now, if you've grown up where you don't even, like, you can't even see your neighbours and you didn't get junk mail. Do you remember junk mail? You didn't get junk mail because they couldn't be asked to deliver junk mail to your house. And like, I didn't live in a super rural area, but for whatever reason, they never did deliver junk mail. Like, if you're not used to seeing people all the time and you hear someone sneeze, it is the weirdest shit ever. And I just remember looking around the balcony and I was like, oh, this is so strange. I don't know how I feel about this. Anyway, flash forward to now, and I have a dog who currently is quite interested in jumping over fences. Yeah. I don't think her and I could be in an apartment without a serious level of anxiety from me if anyone was to open a balcony door ever, unless we're on a ground floor apartment. So like, I recognize that what I'm saying to you is not necessarily the advice I'm feeding you, which seems a bit hypocritical, but I'm also prepared to make big swings and moves to deal with the property world. And I bought a property interstate for me to live in, which I've failed to move into for a whole variety of reasons. Because I went through this conundrum of figuring out, like, could I live in an apartment? And for all of the aforementioned reasons, I decided it wasn't for me. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to trade off something else. And so we are all probably definitely making trade-offs. And I just don't think people are talking about it enough. And so everyone feels like they have internally failed. You haven't failed. The world around us is changing. And it's unfair. And I wish I could fix it because I want to. But unless I have some sort of, I don't know, wand, which doesn't seem like it's at the ready, I can't. But what I can do is give you the tools and the insight so that you can make the smartest decision for you. And the decision that you make might be completely different to what you've ever dreamed of, what you've ever even considered. And it's okay to just test your own boundaries and to maybe hold lightly the thing that you thought you wanted for a long time and sit curiously and ask, what could I do? What else could I do? What other options do I have? Where else is there realistically an opportunity for me to get in here or upgrade or rent vest or whatever it might be? Don't judge them straight away. Just like put them all on the table and see what kind of gets spat out. So let's talk about affordability, because clearly I haven't banged on enough about it already. We contextually have had an interesting quarter. I mean, we're off the back of like 5 years of crazy growth, right, since COVID. But a couple of months ago, the government sort of weirdly, like overnight, was like, oh, hey, we're making some changes to the deposit scheme starting soon. We were like, what? Isn't it starting in January? And they were like, nope, get ready, we're going. And so everyone was like in a bit of a panic station because they were like, oh God, okay, right, shit, I've got to get pre-approval, I've got to get moving. And, again, people who are in the real estate market are like, this is just going to drive up property prices. And so you had sort of a few things going on. You had a market that was already predominantly moving up. Remember, there are markets within markets, so not everywhere tracks the same way, certainly not all the time. But you had spring, which generally is when property prices go up anyway, and you had this change to the 5% deposit scheme in terms of how much the caps were, what the income caps were, and how many places were available. So, yes, these schemes help, but let's be really clear, we can see even just in the very short amount of time that these changes have come in from, it definitely is inflating the entry-level band of property prices. It doesn't necessarily make them bad, but we've just got to be honest about that. So we are seeing that property prices in that sort of sub 800,000 mark, they are getting pushed up faster than other price brackets. Again, something to be aware of if you're a first home buyer. Okay, the whole conundrum with property is that there's not enough stock. Yep, simple supply and demand issues. Allegedly, there were 18% fewer properties for sale than average, presumably over the last month or so. And homes are selling in about a month. 29 days is the data I've got, which is about a week faster than normal. So there's less stock on the market, which means more people scrambling in, particularly with the addition of these extra people that have a 5% deposit only. So we have more people in the market, especially in that lower price point. We have nearly 20% less properties that are selling, which is culminating to a shorter sale cycle, so 29 days, about a week less than it used to be because people are like snapping them up. And only, let me see, like people are not getting discounts. It looks like, I think it's like 3% got a discount from the asking price. So basically it's a seller's market. You have less choice as a buyer because there's not as much stock available. You have less time. So, there's annoying tactics that real estate agents do to be like, well, I've got 5 other people ready to go. And you're like, oh, they're just trying to like rush you. They probably are, but also they probably do have a lot more people and they probably are going to make a decision super fast. And there's less wiggle room because not many people are taking deals. So I just, I understand that can feel brutal and a lot of pressure on you. So you do need to make sure that like you have a really solid game plan if you are, stepping into this fight, because it is going to be hard won and it's going to have, you're going to come out probably feeling a bit battered and bruised and emotional, which is absolutely valid. But like you need all your ducks lined up and you probably need a support crew because like it is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever financially make. You don't want to muck it up, especially if it's your first one. Okay, so let's kind of dig into that a little bit deeper. Let's go into the data a bit more. What I find so interesting about this, because we always bang on about first home buyers, and I know that a lot of you who do listen are first home buyers, but I think as a society we always talk about first home buyers. But interestingly, investors are quietly buying a lot. So for example, first home buyer loans, so the amount of people that are borrowing as a first home buyer, that's only up slightly. That's up 1.7% allegedly in the last quarter. But investors are still the overwhelming majority of people. That's nearly 40% of new lending is going to the investor market. And you can imagine we live in an unfortunate world where money makes more money. And the more money you have, the more money you make, the more money you have to buy other things that make money. So first home buyers are not the majority of the market. Investors are, as I said, 40% of new lending is going to investors. So we're seeing about 5.5% as interest rates for owner-occupiers. It says about 5.7% for investors. I'm not sure if that's true. At the time of recording this, we've still got a cash rate at 3.6%. So we don't have a high interest rate environment right now. I am slightly worried by the recent inflation data, because you might remember people got their crystal balls out and they were like, oh, we see some rate reductions perhaps at the end of 2025, perhaps at the beginning of 2026. I think their crystal ball might have been a bit foggy that day, because now, of course, with the new data, they're like, ooh, that inflation number's a bit scary. Are we in fact going to see an increase? I don't know, because I don't bring a crystal ball with me for exactly this reason. And we also know that the other crunch and frustration is that most people who are wanting to get in are simultaneously renting in a market that is also tight from a supply perspective, with very few to often no rights as a tenant. And we have seen nationally rents have gone up 4.6%, which is about $27 a week in the capitals, which is actually less than what I had expected. But again, if you think about that on top of, everything else that, you have to pay for, feeling like it's getting higher and higher and higher, every dollar that you have to put towards those is a dollar that can't go towards your deposit, which can be really challenging. Okay, after the break, let's just take a deep breath in the break, and I'm going to give you the what to think about, how to get ins, strategies, ideas, tips, hot takes, because I think I've given you enough data. Let's talk about now what the hell you do about it right after the break.
If you're after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. If you would like help based on your own personal situation, head over to moneypodcast.com.au, click Get Help, and we'd be happy to introduce you to one of our trusted professionals. Our panel of vetted financial advisors and mortgage brokers work with people all over Australia so they can connect with you wherever you are. That's moneypodcast.com.au and click Get Help.
Okay, I know I've given you a lot of data in the beginning of this episode, and I apologise, but I just wanted to do a bit of a lay of the land, because the landscape is dynamically changing all the damn time. It's a bit like the weather. You think, oh, I know what this season is going to look like. Boom. You thought it was going to be sunny. Now it's storming all the time. Or is that just me here in Sydney? Actually, thoughts and prayers to everyone who's had storms recently. Feels like it's been everywhere. In fact, random side note, my little family in the arse end of New Zealand, hello if you are listening, which I'm sure you're not, my auntie and uncle live in a rural town, actually out of a rural town on a farm, where my family is from, experienced some intense storm. I don't know, my grandmother said she'd never seen a storm like it. She's lived there her whole life. My auntie and uncle were without power for 12 days. 12 days. Can you imagine, one night might be kind of cute and you think, oh, wow, thank God we've got candles and lighters somewhere, but also annoying. 12. Can you imagine living for 12? It would be like you'd gone back into the old ages. And I said to them, thank God you've got a wood fire, because where they live is just perpetually cold. And not internal heating that's electric. Hashtag wild weather and climate change. I do worry about this when we're thinking about buying properties. I'm like, goodness me, what is the weather going to be like, and how are our properties set up to actually withstand said weather? Okay, that's enough tangents, because that's not really helping you get in, is it? No, it's not, but it might just be a reminder to check and see where your torch is, and if you've got candles and things, should that happen to you, which I hope it doesn't. Okay, so we've got the 5% scheme, which, as I said, is much broader in terms of who now is eligible. So if you haven't checked in on it, go and have a look to see if the property price makes sense, to see if, basically, I think you're eligible, really, because they've taken away those income caps, and they've taken away how many placements they were giving, which was always a bugbear of mine, because there were very few placements. But to go from however many placements there were, I don't know, 35,000 a year or whatever, to completely unrestricted feels like quite a jump quite quickly. Anyway, that's what they've done. So it does mean that if you're buying your first home, it could save you potentially tens of thousands of dollars in lender's mortgage insurance. My issue with this is, and I'm sorry, Albo, this does nothing for affordability of homes. What it does do is create more accessibility. It enables more people to get into the property market, but be damn sure about it, it does not make the property more affordable. In fact, you are going to have more of a burden on your shoulders because you are borrowing 95% of the debt or the house value, and that means you are going to have an enormous mortgage, presumably, for a really long time. Forget interest rate changes, just the level of debt that you're taking on to have to service that is going to be a large proportion for most people of their income. So yes, I like that it gives people an in, and I think we need an in so that it is not just the wealthy people who have access to property, because I think if you're new here, I'm very worried about the middle belt of Australia being squeezed out. So sure, creates accessibility, but let's not mince any words. This does nothing to create more affordable homes for young and first home buyers. It doesn't. But we have that as an option. Remember, importantly, I think this gets missed a lot. You got to live in it, and I think you actually have got to live in it until it reaches that 20% LVR or loan to value ratio. So if you're only like hop, skipping and jumping in or hoping to live there for a little minute, you might need to go and look at the T's and C's and fine print to see whether that is appropriate. Now, why would we do that? It avoids us needing to pay lenders mortgage insurance, which can be a lot of money, which is actually insurance that bankrolls the bank in case you default. But it also means that you're not trying to outsave the market, which is racing ahead of you and maybe not something that you can outsave. So I like that part. It's just giving you an in, but you're like biting the bullet and like having to deal with the brunt force of a large property price, but you're in. So like you can sit and enjoy, I was going to say your Aldi wine, but I'm in no position to be bashing up Aldi wine, as you might be sitting on milk crates for the remainder of your days. But you're in. Oh my God. You might not have electricity. You might be like my auntie and uncle. You might be living by candlelight because you might not be able to afford your bills, but you're in. Well done you. I'm sort of saying this half in jest because like I would be happy that you're in, but I'm also definitely being sarcastic because I'm like, how diabolical is this? So the 5% scheme's there. Think about whether it makes sense for you. I do like that it isn't going to see you waiting on the sidelines forever trying to outsave a market that you can't outsave. But I want you to really go eyes wide open, and I want to make sure that you understand the implications of doing that, both from a cash flow perspective and also get that LVR percentage correct. You might not even need to pay lender's mortgage insurance though. There are a number of listed occupations that don't actually pay lender's mortgage insurance. So you might want to go and talk to a mortgage broker about whether that is a feasible option. You know, people off the top of my head like doctors and lawyers and engineers and things like that, they actually have LMI waivers a lot of the time with big banks or lenders. So that is a consideration depending on your occupation. Definitely go and chat to a broker about that. The other one, and I think we need to, I say we, obviously I don't mean us. I mean the people who are in charge at the helm, whoever they are. We need a hotline to them. I think there's a lot of complexity and a lot of fear, and I've probably been somewhat guilty in creating the fear because I want to make sure people understand all the things. But I think that this is where we're moving to, which is more people are kind of co-owning properties together. And like there is nothing like women sharing videos with each other on like older retirement sort of lives where just old women get together and live in some sort of compound or commune or, I don't know, tiny house, village or eco community, just living the best of days with dogs and cats and, I don't know, flowers and chickens and shit. There is no greater love than the love of aspirationally sending this to your friend and you're like, one day this will be us. Or is that just me? I'm sure it's not just me. My friends and I literally a couple of weeks ago, we were like, where can we buy? Where can we all go in? And we'll just have tiny houses in the different, corners of the property. And whilst we joke about it, and whilst there definitely is a lot of complexity because there's living with people and then there's the reality of living with people. But I want you to remember as a first home buyer, we have got new laws now that say, or conditions is probably the right word, that you can buy with a sibling. You can buy with a partner, which you've always been able to do and get some stamp duty exemptions, but you can also buy with a friend or a flatmate or, I don't know, your cousin. Obviously, you've got to figure out if you could actually physically live with them. But rather than shouldering all of this burden alone, is there someone else that you could do this with where you wouldn't have it rosy and unicorn-like all the damn time because that's not real life, but you could actually genuinely cohabitate with each other. You're on the same page in terms of what you want, what you need from a property, and you could harmoniously live together. I would always encourage you to get like a legal agreement, obviously. But I know that councils have also made it really hard for these. I sort of, was joking, but also definitely not, about these sort of little villages that people want. People are really screaming for community. And I think that in a lot of places, it's actually really hard to build it and develop it. And yes, I understand there's a lot of legal shit to work through, but I'm also like, can we at least try to make it easier so that if you did want to do that, there is some potential for that to be possible? I don't know. Can't we all just live in an eco-village together? Oh, I'd love it, but I also really love my own space. So I just want to dip in and out of the community things and then scurry on back to my little abode alone and read a book. So do get a co-ownership agreement if you are going to look at doing this with someone else. I was going to say especially if they're not a partner, but like probably maybe also a partner. Think about how you own it. I won't go into all of the details, but there are different ways you can own it, being tenants in common or joint tenants. They are very different, and how, things and shit goes down if one of you is no longer around is really different depending on how you own it. So you want to get that stuff right. Don't skimp out on advice here. It might cost you a little bit, but it is worth every penny if you get it right. I also want to just call this out, and I know I already have, but we just got to remember that Australia is a damn big place. I'm going on holidays in 3 weeks, and I didn't even know where I'm going on holidays, which I'm embarrassed to say is probably like an hour from where I'm recording this today. I had no clue that this place even existed. Not a clue. Nor the surrounding suburbs. No idea. I grew up about an hour from here in the opposite direction. Australia is just so damn big. It's so big, and we forget about that. So you might need to think beyond your postcode. We know that even with rapid growth, places like Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, yes, wildly more expensive than they were a little while ago, but still far more affordable than places like Sydney or Melbourne. And we do know that they do have, at this point in time, good growth within them. I understand that there's a whole conversation here around career, around community, and what you want, and I get that. But I also think if you're moving somewhere and it may not have the same income expectation, consider that through the lens of, well, what if I earn less but my living costs are considerably less? Does that net itself out? Could I actually live somewhere else? I always tell people, go and do Airbnb in a couple of places, and like, if you can, like, go to an office, like go and work in a co-working space or whatever if you don't have an office in the new location. Like, test what real life would look like. It is an expensive endeavor, but it's far cheaper than making a big mistake and making a big move and then pulling the ripcord because it wasn't for you. There are also lots of amazing regional places in Australia. Many of them have had considerable growth. Look at regional WA. Holy Jesus. Hello to those of you from regional WA, if you listen. That has had phenomenal and insane growth. But like, you might just want to get in the car and like go on a bit of an adventure to realize that there are places beyond the capitals. And there are great regional areas that you might want to consider as well. And of course, and I was speaking to someone who is in my greenhouse program only at the end of last week about this, about rent vesting. For her and her situation, it makes much more sense for her to rent where she needs to, and then purchase where she can afford, but also where she thinks is going to create long-term growth opportunity. It was either that or her sitting and waiting and hoping that she could afford the area that she's living in, which is just not realistic. And so by her rent vesting, she's getting a foot in the property market. She's staying for a variety of reasons, including children. As a single mum, there's some complexity for her, which I absolutely understand. She can't just move her family. So she's staying where she is, renting and loving it, actually, which is really nice to hear, and buying somewhere that is much cheaper than anything she could have afforded in and around the area that she's currently in, means that she can look everywhere from a growth perspective, because she is not tied to one postcode or needs to be near one school or, close to commutable, train stations or whatever for her work. She doesn't have to worry about any of that. She can literally take those blinkers off and go, right, where is for my budget going to give me the best growth? And that has provided her a lot more choice and opportunity to deploy her money, to still be in property, to still see it as a secure, way for her to build her future, but not with the confines or constraints of needing to live and own in a particular suburb. So don't forget that that is an option for you as well. I just think also when we're talking about all of this, like, some data I saw at the beginning, I think. Let's call it like April-ish, I think, of 2024. I saw that men are more likely, this was data from what was then I think called CoreLogic, but now it's called Cotality. Men are more likely to buy investment properties than women. Generalization, but this is what the data suggested. Men are more likely to see it as an asset for wealth creation. Women are more likely to see property purchases for security. I want to remind you that buying investment properties is a way to have financial security. I think what I surmised from that is it's like the security of living in a home that we own, which I absolutely understand, and no one's going to come and like rip you out of it. I get that. But that also limits us. Men in that report were also more likely to purchase with, say, a father, a brother, a friend, and get into investment properties. Women were far less likely to do so. They were much more likely to either purchase with a partner, purchase alone, or not purchase at all. So I think we just need to, again, put our thinking caps on and understand, that it is a wealth creation tool that can provide you with stability and security, and that perhaps you could team up with someone that you trust and that you have alignment with and not have to do it alone, which is exciting and creates much more opportunities. More complexity, sure. Lots of chefs in the kitchen, but doable, don't you think? And yes, apartments are growing at a lesser rate than houses. We already know that. But maybe it isn't a home that you buy. Maybe it is an apartment. Maybe if you are really doubling down, I have a lovely friend her and her partner, I think they bought a couple of years ago. They were like, we couldn't think of anything worse than to buy a house. Absolutely not. We don't want all the maintenance. We don't want any of the BS. We don't want the headaches. We don't want to, all of that stuff does not appeal to us. And so we are looking for an apartment that is house-like, but with none of the maintenance. And so they were really considered. They were very careful, and they have bought, honestly, one of the most beautiful apartments I have seen, especially at their price point, which, they didn't have millions and millions of dollars. And their idea is to stay there as long as they can. And it is really large. And so, again, not all apartments look like that, but they were really specific around not wanting a house. And apartment living is for them, which I think is so great because it's a narrative that isn't said enough. And they're super happy there. And they're in the midst of everything, literally everything. Whatever you need, they can walk to. But they're not growing at the same rate of homes. They are okay with that. They were okay with that because for them, they were looking at what works for us and our lifestyle needs. How can we have a big house so we feel like, or a big apartment so we feel like we're not living on top of each other, which they absolutely have. It's like a 2-story. It's got this big vaulted ceiling. It's beautiful. It's got massive windows on many sides. And it's in the midst of everything. It may not grow as much, but it might be a wonderful opportunity for you to get in or be able to have some sense of control over your budget because you might have money to be able to now deploy to other things. And it might just be really great. It might be great. Or it might be a stepping stone. Just remember the growth is not the same. So, once again, I have failed in my endeavour to give you shorter episodes. You are so welcome. Property is always a heated debate because people in the market want the market to keep growing. And you would too if you were in the market. Most people do, especially when you're paying such an awful lot of money every month to go towards your mortgage. You're like, oh God, I hope this gamble pays off. But you can also imagine for many people who haven't bought property, this is a really stressful time. This feels really hard. And so, of course, when I'm talking to many of you, and there are so many of you that listen, so a giant thank you. I'm so appreciative of you being here. You have to expect that there are people from all the sides with all the feels, and we haven't had, I don't think, conversations that are caring enough. We're just always pointing fingers. And if we want to point fingers, it is not at you or to me. It is not. It is to a whole bunch of other people who are not necessarily even in power anymore, really. And yes, sure, many who still are, sure. The population of Australia is likely to continue to increase. You can have whatever philosophical conversation in your head you want to about that. They haven't created this problem, by the way. We have not been building enough homes. We have an aging population who have no incentive to move out of their big homes and downsize because they're going to have to pay stamp duty again. So we have cute little old ladies and men probably sitting in these massive homes that are where they've built a life that don't want to move. And that is their right, as frustrating as it is. We have families squashed in a lot of instances into homes that are not necessarily able to cope with their rambunctious tribe, that feel like they can't make that next step. Like, there are a lot of big issues, and we see investors with capital, with the ability to borrow more, with good equity, able to continue to build wealth. That is not necessarily their fault. That is the system that they're working within. And so we know that one of the biggest predictors of whether you will live in poverty in your senior years is whether you own a home that you live in that is debt-free. If you are going to rent forever, you're going to need to have a really big and hard, deep think about how much income as an annual amount you're going to need to be able to satisfy all of your living costs, including rising rents. But the market moving is not a fad or a phase or something that I almost wonder whether we've just become so like, I don't want to say blasé because I don't think that's the right word, but like we just roll our eyes. Like I saw the data and I was like, oh yeah. Like I'm actually not even having the emotionally charged reaction that I used to have because I'm just like, yeah, I understand it. The question to you is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with all the data that I've just told you? With the realization that property prices are probably not going down unless something weird happens, and look, we do live in a weird world. But if they're not going down, what are you going to do? What could you do? What would that mean? What would that give you? What trade-offs would that require? And how would that make you feel? If you know that someone is dealing with all the things around this, send them this app. If nothing more than just feeling the solidarity together, I think we need to have more and more of these conversations. Don't give up hope. You will look back in years to come and be really proud of taking the next step. You just have to figure out what that next step is. Just take the next step. And once you've taken that one, then you can take the next. Good luck. I would love to hear where you're at, what you're intending on doing, and where you're stuck. Jess Brady _financial advice on the gram. Otherwise, you can post in the Money Facebook community. I wish you a lot of, I was going to say luck, but I'm like, I wish you a lot of diligence, persistence, tenacity, and a little bit of luck. And when you mix them all together, and when you're happy to be a little bit outside of the box, you might just strike metaphorical gold. You know what to do. Go now and be financially fierce. Bye.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Any advice is general financial advice only, which does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Because of that, you should consider if the advice is appropriate to you and your needs before acting on the information. If you do choose to buy a financial product, read the Product Disclosure Statement, PDS, and Target Market Determination, TMD, and obtain appropriate financial advice tailored to your needs. Jessica Brady is an Authorised Representative of Paragem Pty Ltd, Authorised Representative Number 1259972, AFSL 297276, ABN 16108571875, Corporate Authorised Representative Number 1305567.